All right, friends, these are the amendments you must know for your APUS history exam, and I'm going to zoom through these because hopefully you did them in AP Gov. First of all, the first 10 are called the Bill of Rights, and they were all 1791. So put them squarely in that time period 3, and you can just list them out with like a word or two next to it so you remember what they are. I would say the most important one of this for APUS history is going to be Amendment number 1 and is going to be Amendment number 10 because those are the ones that people fight over in U.S. history the most. Not in modern history, in just like all over U.S. history. So let's talk about the Bill of Rights real quick. First of all, the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution right after the Constitution was ratified to try and limit the size and power of the federal government. It had been championed by the Democratic Republicans, or the Anti-Federalists, sorry, they weren't Democratic Republicans yet, the Anti-Federalists, which will morph into the Democratic Republican Party, so that people who are more states' rights would not feel like the federal government was too big and too tyrannous like they had just experienced a decade prior under Great Britain. So here I go. I'm zooming. First Amendment. Speech, press, religion, assembly, petition. There's some like cute acronym. I don't remember what it is. It is like the cornerstone of American democracy. So many Supreme Court cases are about these because it protects citizens' rights. But the line is kind of vague. So the courts end up deciding this stuff a lot. So Amendment number 2, the right of people to keep and bear arms. This was in reaction to what we had experienced under the military, military occupation by the British. It was in reaction to things like Lexington and Concord, where there was like a store of British weaponry, and the citizens felt like they were unprepared. So the Second Amendment is like a reaction to their experiences under Great Britain. The Third Amendment prohibits the quartering of soldiers in private homes without the consent of the owner. Again, this is in response to the British during the Revolutionary War. It doesn't really come up today, but it kind of reflects the colonists' desire to safeguard their personal privacy, their homes, their stuff. So the Fourth Amendment, again, is in reaction to the writs of assistance under the Revolutionary War time period, when the British basically said we can search anything, anytime, anywhere, and we don't have to tell you we're doing it. So it protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures, requires a warrant for that, requires probable cause, and it will be like litigated in really notable cases like Mapp v. Ohio and stuff like that. That's all government stuff. We're gonna move on. All right. The Fifth Amendment is the I plead the Fifth. You don't have to incriminate yourself. And right to a grand jury is really important. Again, reaction to the British. Actually, 5, 6, and 7. All of this is a reaction to the British because of the admiralty courts, vice admiralty courts, where colonists was judged by a single judge, no jury of their peers, and that judge was usually a British official, and so it was always really, really unfair. So the Fifth, Sixth, and Seventh Amendment are trying to like stop that unfairness. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the rights of individuals accused of crime, a speedy and public trial, impartial jury, confronting witnesses, and again, the Miranda rights, Miranda v. Arizona, has kind of ended up being added on to this. Essentially, the Seventh Amendment guarantees the right to a jury trial in civil cases. Again, the framers believed in the importance of jury trials because multiple people's opinion means justice because of their experience under having those vice admiralty courts. Eighth Amendment prohibits excessive bail, excessive fines, cruel and unusual punishment, added to the Bill of Rights to protect people from inhumane treatment. Moving on. Number 9, the Ninth Amendment, rights not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution are still protected. Our founding fathers knew that the Constitution could not every single situation is going to be written down. It doesn't mean that other rights are not retained by the people just because it's not expressly written. It was kind of added to reassure some Americans that the government couldn't infringe on rights that aren't expressly stated. Okay? And then the 10th Amendment will be fought over. It states that powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the state rights or the people. And this kind of emphasizes that principle of federalism, that there is federal power, and then underneath that umbrella, state power, and underneath that umbrella, local power. But anything that is not like expressly stated is supposed to go to the states and the people, so that local people retain significant power, and to balance that power with the federal government, because the states' rights people, the local rights people, were really afraid of such a strong constitution. Okay, Reconstruction Amendments, we have free citizens vote. So 13th is free, 14th is citizens, 15th is vote. The Reconstruction Amendments, here are the dates. They're all time period 5. The 13th Amendment is 1865, the 14th Amendment is 1868, the 15th Amendment is 1870. So the 13th Amendment, technically, because of the Emancipation Proclamation, slaves are already free, but that had no enforcement, it had no teeth to it. So this was part of the Reconstruction effort to rebuild the South, secure civil rights for African Americans. It abolished slavery. 14th Amendment, free citizens, making them citizens, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, and guaranteed equal protection. So that equal protection of the law is the one that's going to be litigated in court a lot. But this gives people birthright citizenship. And that has been a hot political topic recently. We're going to move on. 15th Amendment prohibited the denial of voting based on race. And so this allows African Americans to vote. However, discriminatory practices are going to come into play. And literacy tests and poll taxes and voter intimidation is going to try and stop African American men from voting. Okay, moving on to the Progressive Era Amendments. We got 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th. This is all going to be in time period 7. So if you want to write down these dates real quick, 16th Amendment is 1913. 17th Amendment is 1913. 18th Amendment is 1919. And 19th Amendment is 1920. Okay? So the 16th Amendment was in response to trying to give the federal government a little bit more power to do more social work, the Progressive Era. So it gives Congress the power to levy an income tax. It basically wants the government to raise revenue in a more direct, equitable manner, and for the federal government to have a little bit more money to respond to issues in the Progressive Era. Some people believe that it enabled the federal programs to grow into what people call a welfare state. That means a state that spends a bunch of money on its citizens, and its citizens like exploit that essentially, but that's a political opinion. The 17th Amendment was again in response to the Progressive Era, because people felt like the federal government was too far away and didn't care about local issues. So this established the direct election of U.S. senators by a popular vote, rather than how it was before, when state legislatures would decide who was the senator and then send them to Washington, D.C. So this was kind of during the Progressive Era to try and get rid of political corruption and corporate influence, where corporations were bribing state legislatures to put some certain person in power at the federal level. The 18th Amendment was a progressive push as well. There was this much more conservative push against the consumption of alcohol. Alcohol was blamed for many of the ills of society, like homelessness, poverty, domestic abuse, child abuse. And so this prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages, and this begins the Prohibition era. It lasts until the 21st Amendment, which repealed the Prohibition era, the only amendment to ever be repealed. It actually had the opposite effect. It led to the rise of illegal production, bootlegging, speakeasies, the whole like mafia mob situation, organized crime, organized around smuggling alcohol in and out of the country and into major cities. So you can bop on over to 21st Amendment if you want to real quick. 21st Amendment is 1933, and it repealed that because it was kind of like a major disaster. All right, and then finally for Progressive Era, the 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote. This was like a major victory in the women's rights movement. The women's rights movement started in the 1840s, 1848, but it took decades, 80 years of activism for women to win the right to vote. There was a large prevailing notion that women's vote, when her husband voted, he was voting for her. So this expanded suffrage and democracy in America. Half of the population, my friends, half of the population was barred from voting, and now that opened. And it gained more political visibility for women, more social visibility for women, and more economic visibility. It's just gonna like spark this new wave of feminism. We have this power, now what else can we achieve? Was kind of the view of the 19th Amendment. Okay, 24th Amendment is 1964, and this kind of goes in during the Civil Rights Movement alongside other reforms like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It prohibited poll taxes. Poll taxes had been used largely to disenfranchise African Americans and poor whites from voting, mostly in the South. And it was part of like a larger civil rights movement to try and make sure that at this point, suffrage has been granted to everyone who is a natural born citizen or has gone through the citizenship process. Women and men and everybody of color now has the right to vote, but there's some things that are barring it. So the civil rights movement tries to fight against that. All right.